Good morning, everyone, and would like to thank you for joining us again for our third webinar out of three in our series of legacy planning, how strong families survive tough times. A little bit of housekeeping again. This is again the third webinar in our series of three of 30 minutes each. We're still looking for feedback on how attendees are liking this format, not only the shorter format but the series. So all feedback is appreciated there. This webinar, like all others in the series, are being recorded. At the end of today's presentation, you'll receive an email with not only the slides from today, but a recording of all three presentations. We've tried to reserve some time at the end for questions. Feel free to use the chat feature in the controls box to send any of those questions you might have. We'll get through as many of those at the end as we can. If you've been following along with these series, you'll understand where we started and where we're at today. This concept of family legacy planning might not necessarily be a new concept to you, but what we've seen in the industry is that there's a lot of talk about it, but not a lot of process, not a lot of solutions. And that's one thing that Jen Legco and Tom Rogerson have really changed, is that they have designed a process and solutions. Jen Legco and Tom recognize leaders and pioneers in family governance throughout the world. Tom uses his 6 steps to healthy family governance to assist families with communication, philanthropic vision, legacy planning, succession, and education. Tom incorporates these critical issues into his client's comprehensive wealth management plan, not only helping to prepare the money for the family, but the family for the money. And with that, turn it over to Tom to talk to us today. Tom, again, appreciate you joining us.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Matt. And thank you, Peak Trust Company and Barbara Kotler, for putting this all together. But I really appreciate the opportunity. And thank you all for attending. As you know, in the first webinar, we covered the whole notion of what's the problem? What are the studies showing? And what are the causes of the problem? Because a lot of people might think it's out there, but they don't think it's affecting them, and because they don't know the causes of it. The second one, we talked about what are families doing to solve this, and what are we seeing thematically of multi-generationally successful families. Today, we're going to talk about how you can do it, how you can, as an advisor, can actually implement these kind of concepts and strategies for your clients, make it part of your practice, and how the families you work with can actually do this kind of work. And so as you recall from the first webinar, I talked about this notion of lower net worth families had tremendous interdependence. Higher net worth families often use their wealth to allow independence to the point of estrangement from each other. If you didn't see this, please go back and watch. I'm not going to go through it in detail today. But then what we were focusing on is today, what we're going to focus on is what my wife and I have created in Jen Legco is a process of helping families go from that middle red dot of independence to the point of estrangement back down to a place of interdependence voluntarily. And we call that our 7-step process to healthy family governance. And it's a process to help families get down to 7. Now, this idea of interdependence and getting away from independence sounds un-American because, good golly, this is America. I mean, we just celebrated between the last week the whole concept of our independence, and it's Independence Day, and it's this whole notion of freedom from. And in reality, though, if you read the Declaration of Independence, it's not a declaration of independence. It's a declaration of interdependence. It's not, I hold these truths to be self-evident. It's we, the American people, hold these truths to be self-evident, that we want to separate ourselves from you, England, based on our shared values. We no longer share your values. And if you really want to get goosebumps about the whole notion of what the Declaration of Independence is really about, read the last line. The last line by Thomas Jefferson is, we mutually pledge each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's an interdependent concept. That is ideally something that families would be thinking of as well. Most parents would actually say this about that we're pledging our lives for our children. We're doing everything we can for them. But in reality, what they're doing with most of their advisors is damaging the likelihood of success. So I hope you had a chance to get a sense of that from what we covered so far. And what we're really adding today is now, how do we as advisors indoctrinate some of these concepts into the planning process and the consulting process we're doing with families going forward. So interdependence, being part of something bigger, brings resilience, grit, and freedom. And I shared some of that last time. But I'm one of my favorite musicals is Pippin. And Pippin, the signature line of Pippin that pulls it all together is this one right here, where Pippin finally recognizing he was chasing independence and chasing his dream, and he finally comes to realization, I'm not a river or a giant bird that soars to the sea, and if I'm never tied to anything, I'll never be free. And believe it or not, all the studies are showing being connected, being connected to, being part of a family or a larger group brings resilience, and it brings the freedom and self-esteem that we often don't get. So how do we build that sense within the families we work with to know and to be known, to love and to be loved, to trust and to be trusted? Because those are the critical reasons that families are failing, and why wealthy families are failing at losing the sense of family faster than the average family. And they're presenting the problems we talked about in the first webinar 2 to 5 times more likely than families of average net worth. Well, the 7-step process that my wife and I created was, and I've taken you through a little kind of vignette of each one of these steps up to today. I talked in the first webinar about the assessment, that we do a pre-family meeting assessment, so they diagnose themselves where they are and what they think they'd like to do about it. And that's what it's designed to do. There are other assessments we take them through, but that's the kind of core one. The next step we actually do at a family meeting is an education process, creating awareness in the family so everybody understands what's going on in families in general. Why is this important? Because awareness is the first step, we think, to change. I mean, it goes really awareness to acceptance to action. That's what so many psychologists would focus on. So we're creating awareness by the education. We think that's a foundational thing. That did the assessment, do the education. This leads to communication. If 60% of the failure, if you go back to the first webinar, is due to a lack of communication and trust around group decision making, why wouldn't we focus on then learning the communication style of family members? This all leads to then a values exercise, and I shared that with you last time. This all leads then to conflict, hopefully management. Can we come up with a way of practicing and managing conflict, not just avoiding it? Well, those are the first 5 steps, and we would do all those in family meetings. What we're going to talk about now is the last 2, and that's the actions. What can a family start doing about this to actually change culture? Change culture by doing, not by learning, but by doing to learn, not learning to do, but doing to learn. And I'd love to share more about that, but we don't have full time to really get into that. But there is a program I've done on family entrepreneurship that really delves into that more deeply, and I covered a little bit last time. But what actions can families do to really change things? And then finally, and most importantly for today's concept, is the advancement. How do we then design a plan that is actually a plan designed to be driven by the family purpose, by agreed upon family purpose? And this 7 steps is a repeat process. Most of the families that we've researched and or worked with that have been multi-generationally successful have family meetings every year. First of all, that's key and paramount, at least 1 a year. But not only that, they have a curriculum that's part of or an agenda that's repetitive, that every year they have some form of education. Every year they have some form of learning about our communication style. Every year they talk about every year they repeat these things, because these are things that do need to be repeated to feel a sense of place and purpose and make it part of their fabric of their family. And because this is repetitive, that's why our mission statement at GenLeg is our passion and mission is to intentionally introduce and reintroduce a family to itself repeatedly. Sounds redundant for a reason. With tools, activities, and metrics to create and measure success, to educate, motivate, and facilitate. Well, I shared with you, as I said in the first webinar, the first and second of these steps. In the second, we went through the third, fourth, and fifth. And as I said, we're going to focus now on the last two. But I did want to say one thing about these family meetings. The Green family of Hobby Lobby fame, they're probably the poster child for how to do some of these things. I was meeting with their family, and I had a chance to talk to one of the sons, and he said, we have family meetings every month. And we focus on celebrating the individuals, and we celebrate who's had birthdays, and we get to know each other, team building activity. They really spend time. They do a little philanthropy together, but they really spend time focusing on what it means to be a member of our family every month, and everybody comes. Well, the next day I was talking to David Green, the founder of the company, and he said, we've only had 3 family meetings in the history of our business. And I'm like, wait a minute. Your son said yesterday you have family meetings every month. And he said, oh, those are the meetings where we focus on the family. I'm talking about times where we focused on the money in the business. Wait a minute, they only had 3 where they talked about the business, and they have them every month where they talk about the family. And I say that, and I emphasize that because most advisors, and I mean like 99% of advisors I talk to, and almost all clients I talk to, when I say you ought to have a family meeting, they are not thinking about a family meeting. What they're thinking about is a business meeting for the family. All they're thinking about is, yeah, we got to tell the family about the estate plan. We've got to talk about the money, the structures, prepare them for succession in the business. They're thinking of a business meeting. David Green said they've only had 3 like that in the history of their family business. They have monthly meetings where they focus on the family. And one of the grandsons in the family said it this way, actually a grandson-in-law. He said, I participate in those family meetings, and I know them and they know me, and I feel very embraced by this family. And then he said this line. He said, in those meetings, we build the bridge of grace and trust with each other so that we can drive the truck of truth over it. What they recognize is we have to practice knowing each other so that we can speak truth. We can drive the truck of truth over it. They are practicing and managing conflict, in other words, so that they can drive the truck of truth and be able to speak truth about it. So I love that quote, and I wanted to just spend a minute because that to me is the crux of it all. So how do we what actions can we take to engage in activities that can really help a family succeed multi-generationally? I'm going to share just a few of them with you. Creating some kind of a mission statement is an action that's a clear, that we normally do that in the first family meeting. But starting to practice decision making that have decisions that have lower consequence. And what I mean by that is that if you're doing family philanthropy, we're all sharing a decision on philanthropy. If we give to this charity versus this charity, it's not going to affect my lifestyle at the end of the day. I'm learning a lot about my family and about giving, but it's not as consequential to me personally. It's a good step, don't get me wrong, but it's not as consequential. The next step, though, is can we make decisions that are slightly more consequential? And here, rather than jump all the way up to deciding on who gets to share family business and succession of the family business, somewhat more consequential are things like, how about planning the next family vacation? I shared this notion with a group of families this last weekend at Ironwood School at their parents' weekend. I was speaking to the parents. These are mostly wealthy families that have children that are presenting problems. And I was focusing on, have you ever taken your kids on a family vacation? All of them. And I said, who planned it? Every single parent said, we did. We, the parents, planned it. We, the parents, planned the whole thing, invited our children, and paid for it. And what we were advocating to them is, what about reversing that? What my wife and I have done, and we actually let our children do some philanthropy. If you go back a step to step 3 there, we let our children do some philanthropy where they give together from some of our structure from a philanthropic standpoint. But we also let them plan a vacation every year. And what we originally did, we set aside a pool of money, we'll let them invest it, and then from the earnings of that, they would then plan a family vacation. And when they finished planning it, they would then invite my wife and me to join them on the vacation they planned. Tickets, hotels, Airbnb, activities, the whole thing. And they learned a ton about each other in a decision-making process. This is, if you remember the railroad tracks I shared with you the first time, this is one of those activities that bind, that build a sense of place and purpose and understanding each other. And they're learning how to make decisions at lower consequence, but there's some consequence, because now there is a consequence. If we go on a crummy vacation, we're all sleeping in a tent that's leaking. and or something like that. And there's a consequence, but it's not quite, we're losing the family business though. But it's building, knowing how to work with each other. In fact, a few years ago, our kids wanted to combine the two ideas I just described together. And for the philanthropy, well, for the vacation, they wanted to go back to Russia to visit the orphanage that my daughters are from. We adopted all 4 of our kids, but our daughters are from an orphanage in Moscow. And for the philanthropy, they wanted to donate a playground to that orphanage. And here's a picture of my kids and some of the equipment that they donated the playground at the orphanage. And here's a picture of my kids at the orphanage. My daughters are right here and here, and my sons are there and there. When we picked up our daughters at this orphanage, they're about the age of those little girls in the background. This was transformative for them. It was a huge, huge deal. And they learned a ton about each other and about what they care about, but they planned it and they invited us to go. I have so many parents that say, oh yeah, we did that. We took our kids on a mission trip to El Salvador. But notice they're saying we took our kids on a trip. We didn't do that. They took us. New York Times liked that story of my family so much, they wrote an article about our family on the front page of the business section a few years ago. But we've continued on with this. As an example, this last Christmas, we set aside a pool of money and let our kids plan a vacation. And they took us to Costa Rica, planned the whole thing. And here's a picture of us, our family on Christmas morning in Costa Rica taking surfing lessons. And again, activities they planned and paid for out of that budget. So this is what I mean by it doesn't have to be about the business. It can be about the family, but we're learning how to make decisions. Now, though, next step, how do we then, okay, so we have a vision, we've got a mission statement, and we've practiced philanthropy and decision making, low consequence, a little bit higher consequence. Now we're doing vacation planning, maybe having a family bank, and maybe have a family office. How do we create a structure to institutionalize that? And this is where we get to step 7, advancement. How do we then make sure the plan, as if you remember David York's diagram, where he had said, ideally, the family purpose should drive the planning process, and the planning process should support the family purpose. And if that's done correctly, the money and the assets go along for the ride. Well, how do we design a plan that's designed to support the family purpose? And a few years ago, a friend of mine and I, Marvin Blum of the Blum firm, thought, you know what? From what we were seeing and what he was seeing, families that were succeeding multi-generationally actually endowed the process, and accidentally or on purpose or structured or non-structured, but they endowed the process. And what we did is we then did a research of all the family structures we had seen that were working and tried to look at what are the common themes and design a new trust structure designed to endow the family meeting process. And we call this a FAST, which stands for Family Advancement Sustainability Trust. And it's the best example I could give you of how we as advisors can actually use a plan that can, or design a plan, or add to the plan that you already have created for your clients, but add to that plan one more trust designed to endow the family meeting process. And this trust is very different than most advisors think, oh yeah, I know, we'll just tack on some of this concept, to our existing dynasty trust or generation skipping trust. Marvin and I thought about that. We didn't believe that that was the way to go. We think the governing structure of this really is important, and also the jurisdiction. And so that's why we thought that this was a perfect topic to talk about with Peak Trust Company as well, because the trust entity would ideally be in a directed trust jurisdiction, with an unbiased trust company being the trustee. Like, guess what? Peak Trust Company. And so this is a perfect vehicle to speak about from their standpoint. But we also thought, if you think about it, if you've got a whole bunch of trusts that are in the family, as most trusts are designed, they are designed to ultimately distribute to the beneficiaries. So they can go out and buy things and hold them in their hands like a mouse or a car, or name it. They can go buy things that they can hold in their hands because they got a distribution to them to do things. This additional trust is designed not to do that. They should never walk away with anything in their hands. That's what they did with the other trust. This trust is designed they should walk away with things in their head. They learned. If we're endowing the family meeting process, they are coming together and they're learning. We've got educators that are coming in to educate, but they're walking away with knowing about each other and themselves, and about issues around the family and what to do going forward differently. So Marvin and I wrote an article in the Trust and Estates magazine, and this is going to be in the PDF, but if you want the actual article, you can get it in Trust and Estates, or we can send it to you if you'd like later on. But it describes the governing structures that we recommended for the trust, and it's endowing the family meeting process. The quote that I use to kind of disturb the wealthy families that I work with, when I go to a cocktail party and there's a bunch of rich people there, and if somebody says, what do you do? If I was describing what I do, like we do family governance, they would always go, oh, I get it. You work with dysfunctional families. If I ever meet one, I'll be sure to refer them to you. And I'm like, no, I don't work with dysfunction. I work with families just like yours that don't think they're dysfunctional, but are actually heading towards potential problems they're unaware of. And we'd like to help you get ahead of the curve. So the quote that I use is when people ask me what I would do, so, we work with a lot of families, and what we're finding is the parents we work with are more likely to endow a chair at a university to help educate strangers than they are to endow a chair at their family table to help educate the family. And they'll look at me like, what the heck are you talking about? Or no, they'll say, oh, no, we've educated our family. We have a 529 plan. We've paid for these incredible educations. Our kids all went to Ivy League schools. I'm like, then you didn't understand what I said. There you're educating them separately. You're using your wealth to allow separation, independence. I'm talking about, do you have a process of educating them together? That's the family meeting. That's what the Greens do every month, all year round, year after year. So this notion of what a trust like that could look like is this notion of really, I can move this just a little bit. There we go. This notion of could a trust be designed that would actually endow the family meeting process? And hopefully in Q&A we can talk a little bit more about what it would look like. But I encourage you to reflect on, why are business owners very likely to build culture of teamwork at work, but not, and they would endow that. They would actually have a line item in the budget every year for the offsite meeting and the advisors they're going to bring in to run the offsite meeting, but they don't have that mentality or that thought process when it comes to going home. And in last week, as you know, I talked about the entrepreneurship concept to some degree. Those entrepreneurs are very likely to have a team of C-suite advisors, and sometimes they've worked with them for 20 years. One client worked 20 years with them. They know, and they deal with problems, and they speak truth about the problems and what we need to do about it, and where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. Maybe you ought to partner up with so-and-so. And they go home and they just kind of, they avoid conflict, and they don't have that level of culture at home. So I encourage you to reflect on that. What could we do to encourage these business owners we work with to think differently? Is the purpose of the family the same for every family? David York's idea that, could we design a plan to support the family purpose? Well, does that mean that the parents already know the family purpose and we can just go by what the parents say? Or should there be inclusion in this? And might a family have a different purpose than the family next door? Turns out, I've done this for a long time now, it is really interesting to see what the family comes up with as their purpose. So I encourage you to really probe that one. What are positives and negatives of focusing on the family before focusing on the money? The parents want to focus on the money. What are the positive and negatives of holding that back for just a little bit while we focus on the family? And what's holding you back from encouraging your clients to fund a trust to endow the family meeting process? I would tell you that the most common funding asset going into a trust designed to endow the family meeting process is an insurance policy. I'm not in the insurance field, but for a fast trust, for a trust that's going to endow the family meeting process, turns out it's ideal, because while the parents are alive, it's perfectly acceptable for them to fund the family meeting. But when they're gone, that's when we want some proceeds to kick in to have the trust then fund it going forward. We actually encourage the parents to fund a trust now, like the one we're describing, and let the children use the money in the trust to plan the family meeting, but also have a portion of the money in the trust buy insurance on the parents, on both of them. And ultimately, when the parents are gone, then it's buying insurance on the next generation. It's an ongoing funding vehicle that turns out to be perfect for a fast type trust. So I encourage you to think about that one as well. Some books I'd recommend to you. I did give in the end of the number one webinar, I gave you a resource list that's quite exhaustive, and I encourage you to take a look at that in the PDF. But 3 books I'll highlight about this that kind of relate to the current culture we're in and how COVID affects all this as well, I think anyway. David Brooks's book. He's a columnist for the New York Times, but he wrote a book recently called The Second Mountain, and he focused on the fact that we as a country have gotten to a place of what he calls hyper-individualism. The pendulum has swung to the point of hyper-individualism. Well, the word individualism was actually coined in 1850, just before the Civil War. We were in other times of hyper-individualism in this country. And David Brooks' book talks about this this culture swing that we need to swing back to interdependence. He doesn't use that term, but we do at GenLeg. But you're going to get a good sense of what he thinks we need as a culture. The one thing he doesn't focus on, though, is family. He focuses on we as a culture need to bring people back together. He doesn't focus on, and the way to start is by encouraging families to do that. I think you advisors are more in the catbird seat to help families really engage in interdependence than most other people that they talk to. But we can really encourage them. If we believe in the culture that we live in is an entity, an organism, it's made up of the individual cells, which are the nuclear families. And if we can build those stronger, that's great. The Price of Privilege by Madeline Levine. She's a clinical psychologist and focuses on the fact that children of wealth, the kind of parents we work with, are 2 to 5 times more likely to present the very problems that these parents are concerned about in their children. The Myth of Happiness by Sonia, and I can't pronounce her last name, but anyway, by Sonia. It's a great book about this notion. We think that wealth and privilege will bring happiness, and it doesn't. And how do we slow down what she calls hedonic adaptation? Because that's really important. So I encourage those 3 books. They're in the reading list, but I encourage them. Takeaway for you, though. I mentioned before these, how do we start to get a client and a family to learn the language of family culture and things like that, and to read books on these topics. But the ones I want to focus on for today, and I mentioned each one of these webinars, they've given you some questions that you could actually ask clients, even if you don't have the answer. If they said, well, wow, that's a great question. What should I do about that? Even if you don't know, these are great questions to start the conversation and to start to change your practice and your clients' minds about what they could do going forward. So ask a client, could I see your agenda for your last family meeting? What successful process of conflict practice and management have you chosen for your family? They're going to go, what? A practice of conflict practice and management? Could I see your family mission statement that your family created, not you, but your family created? Is one of your trust designed to invest into your heirs rather than distribute to your heirs? Have you thought about that? These are great questions just to get the conversation started. I'll go back to where I mentioned in each one of these. How do we, what do we do next? Get started. Don't wait. I shared last time this notion that entrepreneurs tend to be people that do in order to learn. But many times professionals are people that learn in order to do. We as professionals often feel we need to know it all before we can open our mouth and present anything to a client to go out and do. Please don't wait till you know it all. Please just encourage people to get started. There are others you can bring in. If you believe in collaboration, bring us in, bring others in. There are others that can come in and collaborate with you to help families get started in this space. So don't wait, get started. Add family governance to your practice and to your family. Hire an experienced facilitator. There are many articles focusing on the need to, a parent shouldn't just learn it all and then go home and lecture the kids. A facilitator is really needed to get it started. Schedule family meetings and do it. Set up a FAST, that trust structure that we just talked about, to endow the process. Use Peak Trust Company as a trust company to be the holder of these, the institutional structure. GenLeg can help. We can help either partner with you or do this for clients of yours, but this is the most important point. And that's why I put it last and first. Get started now. And again, this African proverb that really says it all. If you want to go fast, go alone. All the entrepreneurs that we work with and you work with know exactly what we mean when we say that. But if you want to go far, go together. These are all of the takeaway key conclusions that I shared with you so far. This is the full list. The ones that I'm adding today, really, to the ones that I shared with you before, are just these two here. Governing practices need to be clear, relevant, relevant, if I can read, and followed. And then this idea of, would it make sense to endow the process going forward? Well, that's a lot to cover again, and we've really bumped up against the clock. I hope that was helpful. I'll be happy to spend a few minutes on Q&A, and so I will turn it back over to Matt if there are any questions and if we have time.
Once again, great presentation and a great way to kind of wrap this up. As we talked about in the beginning, I'm sure many, attendees on today's webinar or those that review the recordings will know that there's a lot of conversation that happens around family legacy planning, the need for it, the importance of it, but not a lot of process, not a lot of how to do it or really concrete solutions. So thank you for that. We did have a couple of questions that came in. The first one is, what's an appropriate funding level for a FAST?
Oh, great question. Yeah, every family is different. It depends on what they really want to do at their family meeting and how many family members there are, and kind of quality of meeting. If they want to have their meeting in Hawaii, or some fantastic location, and don't get me wrong, the bulk of the money shouldn't be spent on just the venue, but if they want to have it in a nice location, it's going to be more expensive. If they don't mind having it during their family vacation that they're going to do anyway, and then they're just going to take a half day during the family vacation, have a family meeting, and the FAST is funding the facilitators and the people you're going to bring in for that, it could be a lot less. But again, with insurance, it's not that expensive to fund it with survivorship insurance. We have one of these. We have 4 children. We have 6 trusts. We call it one for each of our children individually, that we love you, love what you care about, and do what you want with it. But the other 2 are our thumbs up trusts. And one of them is a donor advised fund, so kind of a trust, but they can give from together. And the other one is a FAST structure. And we actually asked our kids what percentage of our estate should go into each of these different entities. They went by a percentage basis, but they wanted about 50% to go into the 4 that were divided amongst them evenly, and the other 50% to go into the other 2. Wow. And so in our case, about 25% of our estate, it's not huge. We're between $5 and $10 million. I'll just say that. But about 25% of our estate's going into a FAST type structure. I think we are at the lower end compared to most of the clients. I've got a family that owns an island in a trust like this, and that island is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's the biggest one that I know of. But the idea is, it depends on each family of what's going to go into it. And owning congregating assets like a vacation house in a FAST turns out to be a really good idea, by the way, but we can talk more about that later.
Yeah. Okay. And then last one is, do you recommend any particular structure with regard to a FAST, particularly trustee structure?
Yeah, also great point. That's why Marvin Blum and I spent so much time and wrote that article about it. We spend so much time designing the governing structure because we think that's really the secret sauce. If you don't think about the governing structure, really, really significantly think about it, it would be easy for the family to corrupt the intent of the trust and end up using it for lifestyle, which is not the purpose of the trust. So we think that you want to have, for example, it really comes down to the distribution committee is the real nuts and bolts of it for the bulk of what the focus is. And the distribution committee should probably be a minority of family members and a majority of non-family members. That could include the advisor, could include affinity members, like a member of my YPO group, like-minded people, entrepreneurs like me. It could include the advisor, the attorney, if I didn't already mention that, or an uncle and aunt, but not a direct bloodline family member that's a beneficiary. They could be on the committee, but they shouldn't be the bulk of the committee because they could corrupt the purpose. So we thought a lot about the governing structure, and it's all baked into the structure itself. But it also goes back to why we chose jurisdictions like Peak Trust Company in Alaska, far better than most state jurisdictions to run these things, because you can have a purpose-driven trust as opposed to a beneficiary-driven trust. And that's necessary for this. So yeah, great question. That's why a lot of thought went into that governing structure.
Great. Well, Tom, that's probably all we have time for today. But again, appreciate appreciate your time and joining us with this, trying out this new structure of the series of webinars. For anybody attending or watching the webinars, again, you'll get an email with these. They'll also be posted to Tom's website, to Peak's website, to Peak's YouTube channel for future viewing. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Tom, special thanks to you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Hope I can help you and others out going forward. So let us know if we can. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.